The Human Founder Podcast by Gali Bloch-Liran.
Hi, I'm Gali Bloch-Liran and welcome to The Human Founder, the podcast where we speak about the mental aspects of the entrepreneurial journey. Entrepreneurs often describe the emotional roller coaster that is embedded in being an entrepreneur or investor, where you experience the lowest of lows, such as when you're the CEO of Kinarot, an incubator in the north, standing near Engev and feeling that everything is collapsing and nothing works, or the highest of highs when you're featured in the New York Times after winning the biggest championship in basketball. And it's from that place of uncertainty, the need to constantly self-manage ourselves, keep up our energy and be mentally resilient in order to deal with everything, well, it's not easy. In each episode, I will be talking to entrepreneurs, investors, psychologists, being their sounding board, with the goal of creating a space for this less spoken about layer, which is the mental aspect accompanying the entrepreneurial journey. I will also share tips and tricks to help boost your focus, clarity, and mental resilience. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Assaf Barnea. Hey, Assaf, it's really, really great to have you here.
Hi.
Let me introduce you. Assaf, you are a seasoned entrepreneur and venture professional with extensive experience in building innovation platforms and leading commercialization processes in healthcare. You lead Sanara Ventures, an Israeli-based healthcare innovation fund backed by Philips and Teva. You're also a managing partner of Sanara Capital, a follow-on fund to Sanara Ventures that invests in digital health, medical devices, and bioconvergence companies. We'll talk about this complicated word later on. Mm-hmm. In addition, you chair the Life Science Advisory Board at the Israeli Export Institute, promoting and advancing the export of Israeli technologies in the medical, biotech, pharma, and digital fields in global markets. You're an advisor to the World Bank's IFC Venture Capital team and a co-founder of the IFC's Tech Emerge initiative, a unique acceleration platform that connects healthcare startups with leading corporations and hospitals in emerging economies. In 2018, the Emerge Health has won the World Bank Group President Award for Innovation, and it's just the tip of the iceberg of your remarkable career. You're father to Uriel and Yali and spouse of Nirit, and we have so many things to cover this conversation, so I'm really, really excited to have you here with me.
Same here.
Wonderful. So, after this opening, take us to the age of 8 when you started playing basketball, and let's see how it rolls.
I'm afraid to say that it started with jealousy. I was
Jealousy?
Jealous. Yeah.
It's a good inner driver, right, for life.
Well, motivation has to come from different angles, but this one specifically, my brother was playing. And then from some reason, which I cannot relate even how, I asked my parents to take me as well. And this was actually when I was 7, and they said, you're too young to play in a team. I grew up in the north, in a city called Haifa, in a city called Kiryat Chaim, and this is where actually I was led to the first team that I played. Eventually, at the age of 8, I started. And within 3 years, I was scouted and moved to Hapoel Haifa, which was an empire. But at the time, this is in Israeli terms, at least the youth division. So I started to travel by bus all the way every day, going in the afternoon, coming back late at night from practices, playing for Hapoel Haifa, where I grew up, winning the Israeli Cup for kids and the championships and whatever for so many years. But I did not realize that at the age of 8, actually, I became a professional. Some people ask me, so when did you start playing professional ball? I said, officially when I was starting to be paid. But actually, the mentality or the tipping point was at the age of 8, because you dive into that and you cannot leave. So I became a professional at the age of 8, actually.
Sometimes you need an external point of view to reflect to you that this is actually what happens, right? I mean, you're rolling in this, you're playing, you're moving between different leagues. There are many, many expectations. But especially when you're young, you are not even aware of it. That's what's actually going on around you.
Yeah, I think these days, the last few years, I'm so very busy to build up Sanara, which we're going to talk in a second. But for about 4 years, I was also the chairman of the Israeli association, which is called Value in Sports. We had something like that in the US. That basically, it's a spin-off out of Stanford University. a group which is active in like 35 countries. And the idea is to take whatever could be taken from sports, which is leadership, postponing immediate gratifications, which is tolerance, which is resilience, I would say. But these are the values, not necessarily education, but these are the values which we athletes, professional athletes, organization can bring to the kids, teenagers, in order to build up their personalities.
Definitely.
So,
for how long you were playing?
So I was playing from the age of 8 till the age of 31. I had to leave the game of basketball because I got injured in my wrist. Everybody remember me on TV with a knee bracelet, and I had to go through an ACL reconstruction on my knee, which I did it in the Giants doctor office in New York. But this was part of it. Eventually, I left the game of basketball because of a wrist injury. The last 2 years I was playing for Hapoel Haifa, and I had some injections in my wrist in order to allow me to play. But a quote that I had, and it was when I left the game of basketball, I had 1 or 2 interviews about it, and I remember a quote by my physician who told me that one day, if you're going to keep on playing basketball, you're not going to be able to pick up your kids up in the air. So this is where
you had to choose. You understood that you have to choose what you're going to do about it.
So that year I kept on playing with injections in my wrist, but when I left the game, I realized that this is it.
So after a career of more than 22 years, you feel all of a sudden, almost 23 years, right? Yeah. That you're going to quit. So what does it feel there? Because you're a talent. You're a talent since you're 8 years old. Everyone are around you. You're moving between different leagues and groups, and you're also traveling to the US, right? In different championships. And maybe you'll elaborate a little bit about it. And really high performance all the time. And then all of a sudden you understand it's only 31 years old, and you understand that you're going to need to change your career, and you're so successful at something, and what happens next? So how do you address it?
We have only an hour, right? So
I'm trying to take, the best point.
but only when I left the game, actually, and later, for so many years then after, I had to explain why, as a professional player, I was also doing 3 degrees, going to the university. I did law school, I did business school, I did political science and psychology while playing professional basketball. Mm-hmm. I was also hosting a sports TV show called Sport TV, which I started with Yael Arad back in the days, and then she left, and I had so many athletes, amazing athletes, joining me for that TV show. So almost being accused for, how come you're not just a basketball player? How come, this is typically in Israel, people, when we say to lefargen, to give credit to, there's no word in English, but there's plenty, which nobody, in some cases I feel that nobody does. But it's actually that convergence of myself, converging into doing some other stuff, being able to play in various courts, not just on the basketball court. So luckily I did political science and psychology, and I was certified as an attorney, and I did business school as well. And when I left the game of basketball, I started the internship, and I was certified, but I did not want to practice as a legal guy.
Now I understand why you asked me.
And even though my oldest brother is a judge, and he said, how come? Are you two going to... When I went to law school, he said, how come? And I said, well, I think it fits me. But when I grew up a little bit, I understood that I need to have different angles, exactly as you are doing, Ali. This is like I had to have more than just the legal aspect, the psychological one, the business one, anything that has to do with the commercialization, the global aspects. And I felt being a lawyer would not satisfy my inner wishes as far as to the extent that I was able to recognize them at that point of time. So the game of basketball was actually a bittersweet farewell. It was an amazing career. Obviously, I had my ups and downs, injury. I had my, highlights. But this is definitely one of the things that I've been was able to take, is actually that unique value that builds your personality for whatever you're going to do later on. And this is something I think that today I probably can touch my kids in so many ways, or I can other kids which I'm trying to touch. This is something that basically, the frustrations, the ability to overcome those frustrations, the inability to explain yourself while being in a team. So sometimes you're in a good shape, but you're not able to perform. This is like in a startup company. You're on a team, but you're not positioned quite well you have to be very accurate in some ways, and to maintain, mostly to be able to maintain and go through the ups and downs again and again. So this is where I truly think that I can add value to. Now on the healthcare side, obviously working with so many entrepreneurs and companies and startup companies, it's part of me which is not connected to healthcare, but definitely I find myself every now and then using those analogies in order to support startups and entrepreneurs.
So a few reflections that I've just heard from what you're saying. First of all, when you quit the basketball because of the injuries, etc., so it made me think a little bit about founders that really succeed in their startups, IPO, exit, M&A, whatever strategy it is. And then what's next? What is the next step? You know, they're selling the company, they are having an IPO on New York or wherever. And then there's this emptiness that is going together with them, and what is the next step? And I think that the fact that you described that you took 3 majors in a university, you studied 3 degrees in various fields, beyond the fact that it gave you a very holistic perspective of what's in life and beyond the court of the basketball court, it also was, in a way, maybe you weren't aware of it when you studied, but it was some kind of a contingency plan or plan B, what happens next? And I think that this is something like a mental note that we need to give ourselves. Of course, when we're in the startup, we're all focused in the startups. We need to make sure that it happens. But if we feel that it goes to a certain direction, maybe a very, very good direction, and maybe even if we need to close the company, that's also an option, a valid option. So before it happens, to sit with ourselves for some time and just recalibrate and think, what are we going to do next? And to plan it. It's okay if we're going to decide to be 1 year at home. It's okay if we want to study something else. It's okay if we want to start a new venture. And it's okay if we want to go and be in a corporate position or in a VC. But allowing ourselves this time to sit back for a second and really plan for the future, I think that it's something very, very very important, And usually when there's something, accelerating point in the startup, either it's a good one or a negative one, it doesn't happen overnight. Usually if you're going to IPO, it's a process of many, many months, a year, or if the company is going to close, it's also usually, and you feel it in the 2-3 months beforehand. Yep. So in this time, as a founder, as a team of founders, you should also think about what happens next, because then it can be very difficult to rise up from that point, and it can be pretty traumatic. That's one thing that I wanted to reflect. And also the second thing that also is similar to us, mutual to us, is wanting to, taste and feel, being curious to the world and learning several disciplines and several subjects in order to have a holistic point of view. I think it's really, really crucial to the world of innovation, VCs, investors, startups, because there's no one way, and you have to be so agile and you have to be so creative. And at the end, you have to understand the behavior of your users. And psychology taps into everything of that. And I really find it, I really like it that you also bring to the table such a, eclectic and diverse background. And I think that as an investor nowadays and venture builder, that you help your startup rise, it's really, really an important point of view. Plus the fact that you as a team player, you can also play with it, being the talent on the one hand, and on the other hand, being part of a team, and how those dynamics actually impact on what happens also in the startup. And much of the research that happens about startups comes from the performance work at sports. So how do you see it as an investor?
First of all, before maybe the professional side of investment, as you hinted out to me quite strongly at the beginning, that you're more interested on the psychological kind of spiritual journey. So 2 things. You're right on the spot in that sense. I think that one of the things that, one of the quotations from Buddhism is that there's nothing constant aside from change. Right. There's nothing constant in life aside from change. Basically, this is something that all of us as people, unfortunately, it could be tragedy because of a car accident. It could be something which is terrifying. But it could be that a company may not succeed. And eventually we gave all our efforts and enthusiasm and wishes and dreams and expectations into that company. But who knows, maybe the use case that you guys have defined is not the right use case, and you're going to go down the drain just because of not being able to listen. And by the way, I'd like to touch the listening component of the Israeli ecosystem, because in so many cases I feel that I'm saying us, we tend to push and push and push and push, and less get inside the feedbacks and listen very, very carefully to what should be listened carefully and help us to make the change, which is crucial. But it is true also about myself, as you mentioned, in some cases I see life in so many cases, not just from the love of Mordechai or for the hatred of Haman, as they say, but rather as a combination of the two. So when I was playing professional basketball, I was very happy to do the 3 degrees from both. I was curious. Psychology was fascinating to me. Physics is still fascinating to me. Healthcare, I'm being fascinated by the stuff that I see in healthcare. So this is the plus. This is the driver. This is the motivation. But it was to some extent the contingency plan for sure. My father used to, we are 4 brothers. My father always used to push us to go. Only boys. And I think that contingency kind of a plan that, and eventually it proved itself, because when I left the game, I left after knee injuries and wrist injuries and stuff like that. And it's still now, it's a bit of a wound. I cannot say that I'm totally out of it. And I'm not sure that I fulfilled all of my expectations, and definitely some expectations that were there, talking about basketball. But it's the ability to overcome, it's the ability to integrate those, emotions, frustrations, expectations into something else and to take it elsewhere. Today, when I speak, and I tend to speak quite often, not just in Israel, in conferences, in panels. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm being invited. Just now I came back from London, and this I'm doing in Singapore for so many years, in other places in the US. I feel that the exposure, the performance component that you've mentioned, is definitely there, where I was able to basically bring it back to myself somehow. Maybe some people say it's an addiction. You're a TV host, whatever. You're used to that, to being infected with the need to get the feedbacks, which is, by the way, not as good. And it's not so much the feedback; it's just the position of being able to perform and get some feedbacks.
But let's talk about it for a second, because Oprah Winfrey always said that the first question that each interviewee asks her after the interview is, "How was I?" And we all need to get a feedback. I also find myself, when I give lectures of keynote speaking, I like to get a feedback of the people, of the listeners, because it makes us better. But there's a line there that we need.
I'm talking about, maybe I did not clarify myself. I was talking about addiction. So many people, players, performers, actors, whatever it may be, it becomes an addiction. It's a manic depression, kind of, they leave the show and they immediately need some other kind of a boost to
because it's
energize.
The dopamine, it's the adrenaline that they need more and more, and the threshold is rising up.
It is. So all I'm saying is that to the extent that maybe I was addicted or not, I'm not sure that it's that tough word should be used here, but to that extent, I'm saying there's another ways, channels that you can compensate yourself for the things that you were not able to achieve. Regardless to the game of basketball, regardless to, whatever I'm now able to do in terms of the performance, the inner side of me, I'm fulfilling that inner side of kind of a performance when I was doing stuff on the court, on the basketball court, now with being able to perform in a different court. And this is in conferences, this is in panels, this is the exposure, this is exactly the feedback. I'm not rejecting the feedback. Possibly I need it myself. I'm talking about the other layer of being addicted to that. This is where I make a distinction about this. I'm not as addicted as I used to be, but it's the level of excitement, and it's the enthusiasm that brings us to work with companies and to find within every business that we do, there's so much that could be taken on the personal level, on the business level as well. 2 points.
What helped you normalize, let's put it that way, this addiction? Because sometimes we see founders as they grow up and as they rise and they raise a lot of money. So also the hubris comes together with this, and they feel that they have it all and they're not even listening. And then if all connected to the other point, so you wanted to mention something about listening, which is something I address a lot, because as Israelis, generally, we don't like to listen. We always like to push and to say. And this virtue of understanding how to listen to each other, investors to founders, founders to investors, relationships, everything, this is where the secret sauce is, because once you listen to someone else, you're not focused on yourself and you're focusing on what happens there.
Just as I won't be criticizing all of the Israeli ecosystem, the entrepreneurship, I'll use an example in Sanara where I bring a lot of delegations to to Sanara office in Ra'anana. And we are hosting in Sanara Ventures. It's like an incubator VC, as you said, supported by Teva and Philips. And Sanara Capital is a post-incubation vehicle to invest in graduated companies out of Sanara or external ones. So not just because of Sanara, but because of my position in the Export Institute and leading as a chairman the board of the Life Science Board for the last 5 years. And also my previous position as a consultant to the World Bank, to the IFC Venture Capital team. But I'm exposed to many of those delegations that come to Sanara. And those entrepreneurs in Sanara, they are used to, here is Assaf again bursting into our room with this CEO of something and something. So in some cases, I'm grabbing them and I'm telling them, listen, why don't you write down, this was the CEO of the largest diagnostic company or whatever. This was one of the largest operators, providers, hospitals that why don't you guys take it for granted just because of me coming in again and again and again? And I see it as a tendency. They're used to and they're normalizing that, visit, which in some other cases that should have been flying 12 hours to, I don't know, godforsaken places in the US or whatever, or in Europe, just to hear this guy saying. But it's the tendency, and us as investors, they need to tell them again and again, specifically what I would say to better define the use cases of core technologies. Because in Israel, we are very good in building up core technologies. But the product market fit is not necessarily there. And this is, I can say for sure, in so many cases that I've encountered. And some of the companies in healthcare, and I'm sure obviously in the high tech regardless, did a tremendous change by the ability to listen carefully and eventually to make an exit. This is one comes to my mind is Itamar Medical for so many years for sleep apneas and cardiovascular applications. And eventually they were sold for $500 million and something. And so many other companies, eventually, there's so much knowledge, and we do need to fine-tune and shape our product market fit to that extent, and the use cases, and not just to waste 2 years or 3 years or whatever, just crashing and hitting into a wall. This is one of the reasons why we have built in Sanara an advisory board of over 100 people. And I'm being teased by that. Some people say, hey, Assaf, how do you manage 100 people? It's too much. Typically, you have advisory board of whatever, 3, 5, 7 people. I said, and then I'm telling them, not only that, I'm increasing it on a daily basis. Honestly, when I meet someone...
It's more knowledge, it's more opportunities, exactly. And then you have to fine-tune to whom you're listening.
Exactly. So actually 2 VCs, one of which is is an advisor to Sanara himself from one of the more prestigious funds in the Silicon Valley, said, Assaf, we're looking potentially to adapt your theme and concept about advisory board. Because if we need someone for Parkinson's disease, so we approach this guy. If we need someone for drug delivery, we approach this. If we need someone from diagnostic, if we need to validate a business model, which is related to mental health, we have a guy from Scripps in San Diego who is very much familiar with the local community in California about mental health startups and others. So the knowledge sharing component, specifically in healthcare, is a must-do. It's such a conservative market. We are stumbling into so many difficulties, into stagnation of decades and decades. Hospitals will not adopt a startup company that will come out of Israel and knock on their door and say, hey, we're here with this feature and whatever. First, they need to have a true value proposition to address a true need, but also in terms of capacities of providers, of hospitals, to integrate and validate, 70 pilots per year, 700 pilots per year. They've been flooded with so many options. And this is why listening to their requests, to their truly needs, to how the process will look like, to who is the decision-making guy in this process, it is so, so crucial.
So you took listening, and I also heard about abundance and also about being humble in this process in order to create a perfect or the best product market fit and to know with whom to talk. And I want to take you back a little bit to the time that you took part in a psychoanalysis and how it impacts you. So maybe share with us a little bit. And was that something that you did after leaving the basketball? And actually maybe, or what happened, the transition between being a basketball player and after all the degrees that you've gained and into the entrepreneurship world and later on as a CEO and later on as an investor. So take us a little bit to your personal journey there.
I'm enjoying this podcast, Alec. And thanks for the questions. This is closing the loop, actually, where basketball actually was a period, as we said before, I was exposed to the extent that I was exposed. I'm very close these days to Mickey Berkowitz, whom I've been playing with in Rishon, and to other players that I truly love as people, and I cherish the moment that I had the chance to play with them on the court. But it's only when I left the game of basketball and understanding that the exposure, being exposed to external. One of the reasons, by the way, that I was not dancing in parties and stuff like that was exactly that. I felt that I'm being measured whenever.
Everyone are watching you all the time.
Watching you and
judging you, and you're judging yourself.
Exactly. So it took me years then after to be able to close that loop and to start again and say, hey, this is, and it's in some cases, there's one specific word into the psychoanalysis process that I did, or into other psychotherapies potentially that you can do, or even sitting on the beach and looking into the ocean yourself. And if you are able to be very accurate, and in some cases just kind of find the right exact word which addresses your soul inside, this is only where you can step out and realize something about the relationship, something about yourself, something about this enlightenment, which should be very accurate and should be defined. So this is exactly what happened to me in the psychoanalysis process. I left the game of basketball knowing that for years I was not, looking into myself. I was looking into reporters. I was on my own. My parents were in the U.S. My brothers were in the U.S. I had to, at the age of 17, I stopped taking money from my parents, and actually ever since I did not. And building up my career. So I was pretty much dependent on, reporters. If they're going to write, Barnea is good, Barnea is bad, I'm going to provide myself with another contract for the next year. So there's a lot of stress, economical stress related to that, and how you can do it on your own. When your parents are not here and they moved to the States when I was 17, as I said. So this actually added to that. But it's definitely the process that I did was, first of all, ask my therapy how long it's going to take. Just very naive. I came in and said,
performance, you need to know. It has a beginning point, has an ending point.
And she said, I don't know. I said, what, 2-3 years? She said, I don't know.
You don't know? How am I supposed to deal now with I don't know?
Some people come to me for years. And eventually I found myself, after 3 years of regular therapy, she offered me to start psychoanalysis. And I immediately said yes. And it was like 3 times a week. Quite costly, I have to say. And in some cases, you go into a long, 3 or 4 months of 3 times a week, and there's nothing into it. There's no insightful or insights, emotional insight, I would say, not the cognitive one, emotional insight. But you can go, it's like in a desert, and all of the sudden you do find the well and the water by just stumbling into a dream or being able to access your subconscious somehow in a different way.
Some trigger that makes you think about something.
Yeah. So after 3 or 4 months, then with one word, you may define a whole new path for yourself. So
what did you find out there?
Oh my God! So this is truly so many things that, growing up as the last child of four a family of 4 brothers, and being able to play for so many years, I did not listen to myself enough, and I was not even aware of some of my, my inner sides, my needs, and my parents were not here so much. They did an amazing job in the first years, but when they moved to the U.S., so this is really was an amazing process of finding more and more. It's the rabbit hole that you can dive into again and again and again, and I did it. So many people that I talk to, by the way, they say there's like a need, there's a stigma about going through a therapy. I just say this is the best course that I did ever. I wish I could take it more.
First of all, thank you for sharing it. I really appreciate it. And I think that by listening to those kind of sharings, it makes it more normalized, and people feel that it's okay. And this is one of at least my wishes. And you said it really beautifully at the beginning when I asked you why. You said, I wasn't for myself. I just wrote it down, your quote. I wasn't for myself. And then when I asked you, what did you find out there? Then you said that I wasn't... exactly the answer for it, that I need to fine tune into myself and to learn better. What do I want? What do I need? And counting on myself, not just or the reporters or the family or others powers that comes from outside. And I think that it also, if we use this analog also to founders, that sometimes they are founders of startups. They're sometimes in this rabbit hole, they're moving and moving like a spiral, and it goes in the spiral that goes up all the time, and so much stress and so many pressure, and what do the media will say, and what will the investors say, and the board, and what will happen in home, and they find it really difficult to just pause for a second and look into themselves and what do they feel and how do they feel about what's happening now, and if that is where they aimed it to go, and if the startups now is actually doing and the business model is actually addressing what they thought in the beginning, and is it still accurate for them or not. And they can be very successful at what they do, but it's not necessarily aligned with their inner self. And
exactly.
and the fact that you are very successful at what you did and high performance and living in the US and playing and winning competitions and being on the New York Times, so you had it all, like the whole fame, but sometimes something from the inside doesn't feel fulfilled. And I think that this place is so important to understand that it happens to the best, to the best, to the high performance, and we need to listen to this place and to see it and not just skip above it.
No, first of all, even about myself, I had my ups and downs, and I had my successes, and I had my downs and failures for sure. And this is something that it's not just out there being spoken. It's something that you feel, and you feel balance, and you get strength out of it if you can turn it into strength. But I can definitely share with you an example of one CEO that we used to work with. And there was a point of time that he was kept on flying to the valley for fundraising purposes, and eventually. And I've been telling him, chances are the company is too young. You have not yet validated your technology. Not enough hospitals, not a clear business model yet. Fundraising with those sharks in the Silicon Valley is not going to work. And we paid for that. Eventually, Sanara was the main investor in the first 2 or 3 years of incubation. And eventually he was, I'm afraid to say, but he was kicked out from those trips by someone in the US saying, you're not a Stanford graduate, don't come here so much. So whether he was or wasn't as talented as other Stanford graduates, I think he was. But it is, in some cases, external, criteria that define, obviously, if you're not mature enough as a company. But following that, he did stop going to the Silicon Valley and looking into the VCs of the Silicon Valley. He was more kind of, here and there. But one of the things that I told him when I was trying to talk to him for that component is also, don't go there as much. It costs a lot of money, and chances are you're not going to succeed. But you're rather also not just doing that. You're defocusing yourself on the other efforts that you should be. So this glory of Silicon Valley VCs and whatever, they're not yet there. One of the things following that is a conversation that I had been telling him. I'm telling you again and again, and you don't listen. And when you do come, I see it also in other people's. In some cases, for that specific person, he had, at least in my eye, this could be a totally wrong interpretation, but he had to get the feedbacks of I'm smart from whoever. It's like every flower, that you have to go through flower by flower and say, hey, I'm beautiful, like maybe, some of the fairy tales that you need to get the recognition or the feedbacks about being smart. But in this specific case or others, we truly need to put aside, and it's hard because we are fulfilling ourselves. It has nothing to do with the business. So there has to be a balance. Good entrepreneurs understand that there has to be a balance between, their expectations and wish and enthusiasm and motivation, which is amazing. I have to say, in most cases, it's amazing. But also to try each and every one for himself, to try to find the right balance of, how they should work with their board and how they listen to their chairman or to other investors and what's the ecosystem. These are not just feedbacks. And obviously, I may be saying it because I'm working with early stage companies. So in so many early stage companies, there's less certainty. There's less, you're not sure about the product. You're not sure about fundraising. You're not sure about the roadmap, about regulation, about this and this. There's so many uncertainties. And this is exactly what you need to come up with a more kind of a structured process, for sure, to validate this and this and this and this, but also internally to be able to really adapt and adjust.
So I really like what you're saying, and I like to with the entrepreneurs that I coach, like to frame the things. What worked business-wise, if you had some good investments or sales cycle, etc. So to model it and to see what worked there, and then to continue behave like that. And also personally and feeling-wise, emotionally-wise, if you felt that something didn't work with the board or with the investor in this due diligence or something, so try to analyze it and understand what was the mechanism there and what didn't work, and try to separate it, the rational from the emotional, and see which component of it you can tweak in order to create a new solution. So you've been through the psychoanalysis and like for several months after 3 years of therapy.
I did 7 years of therapy.
7 years altogether. I believe that I always say that we all have mental health and it never stops. It evolves and it changes. That's just the way we are and just the way life. And we don't just need to take care of our physiological health, but also our mental health and mind and body together. So what brought you there later on to the field of health and medical health and digital health? It was like a direct connection to the sports and everything, or you got there by a coincidence?
By coincidence, which is never a coincidence.
Of course, it's all serendipity of something.
It is serendipity, but it's also serendipity of, then again, if you are able to listen to your wishes, your excitement. When I was living the game of basketball, I'd met a very good friend who's now the managing director of Hadassah Children Department. He's managing like over 100 people, Professor Itai Shavit, and another friend of mine, his name Chaim Shani from Unitronics, the CEO of Unitronics, is a high-tech company. And the three of us actually were entrepreneurs doing the most stupid, serious mistakes that one can do. And when we built up CardioSense, it's a startup company, medical startup company that we founded 20 years ago. And that actually set the way and paved the road for me to step into entrepreneurship and into all the stuff that I've been doing. So,
but CardioSense, what was CardioSense? Why?
CardioSense basically had to develop a probe on the finger for patients to diagnose the early onset of stroke. Stroke in some cases, but shock cases more so. Stroke is another company that we just invested in. But shock is a situation where people may be falling into irreversible damage to your human body, to internal organs, and in some cases, unless it's a car accident, whatever, that everybody understands. But this is where we started with CardioSense, and eventually ending up as an incubator company up in the Technion of Haifa. And it was at the time it was a very good incubator. But after a journey of 10 years, we had to shut it down. And we did all of the mistakes that those I'm trying now to avoid and to teach some of our companies in Sanara to avoid those mistakes. But it actually brought me to the beauty of life science and to the beauty of being an entrepreneur, to the beauty of going all the way to Seattle. By the way, it's a true story, with the very first prototype, which was doing some kind of a mechanical push on the finger, and meeting a CTO of a space lab, which is a large monitoring company based in Seattle, on my own. From that reason, whatever, I don't remember, but I was on my own. And I'm not a technical guy, I have to say. And eventually, that very specific moment, I'm taking the prototype, putting it on the table in front of a CTO of a 3,000 people company, and the device is not working.
The best show in town. It's usually like that in demos, right?
Exactly.
So what happens there? How are the high performance knowledge and practice within your body from the days of being a basketball players find themselves now to react in this situation?
Stressful situation whereby nothing helps. Not the fact that I was a player, not the fact that I had my degrees, not the fact that I was telling myself before that I should explain about this and this. Simply for 15, 20 minutes, it did not work. And it feels so shitty. You travel from Israel, to those who know, in Seattle, it's all the way the other side. And it was, eventually we were able to pull it out and to get into a relationship and to try and co-develop that product, which eventually did not succeed, which I'm very proud of, by the way. But it's
also the process of learning.
Oh, for sure. And I believe these days also for Sanara, not just about the advisory board whereby we have over 100 people, it's the partnership, true partnership, and the knowledge sharing and stuff which I'm impressed. I'm trying to learn myself and to teach and educate myself. And when I am being fulfilled with something new, I'm always trying to share with my colleagues and friends. I'll give you an example. 4 years ago, I felt that, one presentations which I typically do about healthcare innovation, open innovation platform, needs to be refreshed. I sat down, I remember that it was like 12 o'clock at midnight, and I just wrote over in Google, innovation platform in healthcare, open innovation. And all of a sudden, I found that amazing presentation about a company called Induct in Norway. And Induct, in a very simple way, is doing like knowledge sharing between 81 hospitals in Norway, supported by the government. And once there's an implementation of innovation technology and a process in Oslo University Hospital, they shorten from diagnostic breast cancer for women, from being able to diagnose and treat properly from 12 weeks into 1 week. This is one of their slides. There's another example you've mentioned, by the way, The Simpsons, when we just started. There's another example of a pacifier for babies, which sends out the oxygens too. And this was an invention of one of the nurses in a different hospital, and now it's been commercialized all over Europe. So it's a knowledge-sharing platform whereby once a hospital has adopted a certain technology and a certain process, they do share it with 80 other hospitals of the best practice. It's amazing.
And it's not of competition. It's like a competition.
Exactly.
And how we can leverage everything together and have a bigger database and help each other.
And in more structured way than just going to a conference once a year, meeting some folks or whatever.
Because it's ongoing. It happens all the time.
And it's backed by a software-based platform, and it's supported by the government to give some kind of presentation.
Like a unique ecosystem that embraces everything together.
And helps one another. So say something was invented in Poria Hospital, why they do not be happy to learn it in Soroka.
But that also goes to some kind of ego that happens in Israel, but also in other hospitals in the world.
This is why the government needs to be involved and creditize, give it some accreditation or some bonus, whatever, into the budget and whatever, but it has to be supported by the government.
And it's, again, everything connected to, you described how you love physics, and I like to hear it because I always tell to my boys, when you'll grow up, I think you'll really enjoy learn physics because it's like it's the psychology of nature, and it's like processes that happens in nature, and it's like I didn't learn physics very deeply, only for a little bit, but it's like it tries to explain the things that are difficult to explain, and then it's like axioms, then you follow up on that. So you're into life science and medical health and medical devices and digital health. Try to tell me, do you see anything special or unique or different in the founders that are in this field? In their traits, characteristics?
First of all, I think yes and no. To the extent entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs everywhere, but it's in some cases the good ones that I see are able to converge. And we have not yet talked about bioconvergence, about this new theme, which we have 5 companies, and we may have been having the largest portfolio in bioconvergence these days in Sanara.
Can you explain to us? What does it mean?
Yeah, bioconvergence means biology converging into something else, biology converging into physics, as you mentioned, biology converging into tech, biology converging into chemistry, and that convergence, that multidisciplinary approach that brings the most disruptive technologies out of that convergence. So we have a company called Sherman Diagnostic in Sanara, which is able, like a PCR, everybody knows these days what a PCR means, and everybody can relate to the fact that, PCRs could be taking 2, 4, 6 hours. You have to go to the major laboratories and stuff like that. And this is like in a point of care on demand, almost like within a minute or two, you can detect any pathogens from germs or viruses within a minute or two. But the beauty and the ability to do so and to spare and not to use the PCR is due to the physics phenomenon, which is being integrated and touches the biology and help us to be as sensitive as we should be, in order for us to have, the specific diagnostic of that specific germs or virus or pathogens, whatever causes diseases. So basically, we have another example is a company called Nano Drops. These are drops in your eyes to replace lenses and glasses, which is amazing. I'm waiting for that, by the way. But they're in an animal model with pigs at the moment. So this is not.
It's a nice caricature, right? To see the pigs with the glasses and then without them.
But they take the pig's eyes and they test it. This is
less nice.
Less, okay. but it's inevitable, and this is something that we need to go through. But the idea is where you take, a laser flash, you create some kind of a pattern on your cornea, And then within those patterns that were created, we're putting albumin, which is a bio-friendly drops in your eyes to maintain the correction that was made. Otherwise, the healing process of the body would have fixed that.
So what do you see in the founders that are addressing those solutions?
They have, to some extent, they have this multidisciplinary capability of integrating, and looking into really stepping out of the box and being able to look into the beauty of life science, which is not biology within itself, but rather biology and physics and biology and chemistry and biology and tech and biology and being able to come up with something which is quite fascinating. Passion is always there. I think it's always there. But it's also, I think that what unique about life science is there's some kind of maybe it's a different level of realism, the understanding that it's conquering the world, like typical high-tech entrepreneurs. And in Israel, they did an amazing job, but it's I think a more kind of realizing the difficulties, the conservativeness, maybe a bit of humility. I think that there's a realism for them to be that skeptic on some stuff and not just jump into everything. I think there's a nice level of pragmatic.
And also a lot of patience, because those processes usually takes a lot of time until they get all the approvals and all the different processes in the FDA, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of grit and perseverance needed there on top of any other
that's a good point.
Founder. I have a question. So from the recent developments and new technologies that you're involved in, so what kind of new solutions, for example, if we're talking about mental health and those areas, so to address depression and to address anxiety beyond the verbal, treatment that we're aware of CBT and ACT and dynamic therapy, etc. So are you also promoting or supporting some kind of new technologies in this area? You can elaborate?
So two notes on that regard. Mental health is becoming huge now because of depression and the changes and the uncertainty because of COVID-19 and the global disruption that we've been seeing, starting with the war in Ukraine and moving to whatever. So it's becoming very, very big now, not just in the US, but across the globe. One of the things that, regardless to that specific change is, and we have that vertical within Sanara, is having one of our principals that came from another fund, a lady named Dasi. She has kind of built an ecosystem or community, I would say, around games for health. That is to say that, when people cannot take drugs because they have side effects and whatever, or they're too young, let's say kids with ADHD, a company such as Akili, which is $1 billion company in California, which actually, this is their reason for setting up Akili, is actually not to give the drugs, Ritalin and others, for kids while their mind is still, or their brain is still under development at the age between 7 to 12.
And they can train it.
So they can train it instead. So it's a software-based solutions to depression, software-based solution to ADHD, software-based solutions, and not necessarily drugs, or potentially being complementary solution to the drug companies to give to those groups within the population that cannot actually take those drugs.
It really works? Is there enough research already to...
Yes. Akili, for instance, became the first FDA-approved treatment for ADHD for kids. And this is, with that, we see a lot of potential. And with that, we are pushing towards seeing, us building a vertical in that, as well as in cybersecurity for healthcare. But also another example for mental health. I just came back from New York, participating in a panel, which was about psychedelics. And this has happened to be that now I'm familiar and close to somehow.
I get so many intros, in the inbox, in the LinkedIn, from so many entrepreneurs that are now trading with psychedelics, because it's really getting to be a buzz now, and a lot of technologies around it. There was an amazing. I'm not using the word amazing too much. I'm trying to be cautious, honestly, but I was amazed by how much the U.S. market and pharma companies from that panel. I've learned that. Just 2 weeks ago, how they're all on a standby position to move into psychedelics. And
for us in Israel, it's very relevant. You take MDMA, for instance. I've heard that some treatments, like being supervised in some of the most best, with the best prestige, with the best reputation, like the MAPS in San Diego, if I'm not mistaken, the multi-center of psychedelics, something, and others that have been looking into psychedelics ever since the 60s of the previous century. People, let's say post-traumatic that have been under some kind of treatment for 30 years, which they did some probably good job, but untouched, and they do remain with the same symptoms, were treated with, I don't know if it was MDMA or something else, but basically within 3 hours, there was a change, the irreversible change that did a tremendous job as opposed to 30 years of work. So obviously there are some uncertainties and obviously some regulations, difficulties related to that, and obviously some of those could be taking us and cause some side effects. But once the pharma industry will adopt more and more, like ketamine and others, which Johnson & Johnson did, and some other companies, and it seems to be like a huge potential for us to touch the boundaries and to basically to stretch the boundaries of the regular treatment that we've been doing with drugs, typical drugs, and looking to treat mental health in different ways, either by software, either by psychedelics. But there are various ways to step into the subconsciousness and various ways to step into the soul and various ways to touch something else which we as human beings did not touch so far. And we need to do our utmost in order to try and help those people.
It's really interesting, and of course, like everything new, especially when it comes to our soul and mind and psychology, it has to be touched with much sensitivity and being very cautious with everything that happens.
With that, I'm kind of more, even though I'm trying to, and I'm very, to some extent, I could be very spiritual and believe in many things, but this is eventually the brain.
Yeah.
So this is whatever we've been taught as kids, and eventually it is the brain. And now these days, the elasticity of the brain, the ability of the brain to compensate within one component, and the network that is being built or being created to compensate for a place which is less functioning within our brain. This is all comes together now in this decade. It was research that was done 20, 30 years ago, but now being materialized into effective use cases.
Because there are nowadays tools and technologies in order to explore it in a much better way. And I think that I really like the comment that you said, because there are some people that are most cynical about mental health and about all those things in this area, but at the end, everything starts and ends with the brain, and this is something, it's computer, it's electricity, it's chemistry, it's like things that you can really measure and see the impact of those things, which gives it a lot of credibility in the way to address it.
So one of the things for us to encounter, when we encounter sarcasm or people who are being cynical about that and that, this is okay. This is typically a protection mechanism, as we know. And this is something that I'm talking about the industry and the colleagues within the industry, whoever the regulators and others. I think now, as it seems, after so many years of looking into psychedelic as a potential, but also the brain elasticity and others, I think there will be tremendous changes in the next decade, both in the digital component of that, the big data, the AI, which is an enabling tool to help those, which is quite fascinating. And this is why in Sanara we are constantly looking into those, I'm trying to participate and be connected to, even if the fact that I'm so very busy these days, but, setting up a call with a VC, I don't know if it's a Montreal base or Vancouver base up in Canada for focusing on psychedelics. There's one in New York that I got to know. And just listening to them, which was totally new to me, I have to say. Take
us back to the listening and explore and have expand our boundaries in order to bring something new, which is not yet no man land now.
When they told me the first, I was introduced to a VC New York base in psychedelic, and I was like, this is not me, what do I need it? And eventually I did speak with a guy. Now I set this conference, and now I met another VC out of Canada, and all of a sudden you found it not just interesting, but very much connected to what you do. Everything is connected.
Definitely.
Everything is connected to one another.
I'd like to hear your point of view about another subject, which has to do with femtech and all the technologies that are focusing more on women's health and a woman's mind and soul and the life cycle of a woman. And it is something that also nowadays rising more and more? Is this something that you're also focusing on and see the problematic that used to be in the past, that not enough medicines and research was done on women, and therefore many of the things weren't addressed in the past? And how do you see it now?
Well, funny enough, there's a conference which is going. I don't know when this is going to be broadcast, but just post this podcast, the recording of this podcast. I'm about to pick up a colleague of mine from the World Bank. She's in charge of the World Bank, the venture capital investment in Asia, and she came to Israel for a Femtech conference, which has been held now in Hilton this week, and she's a speaker there. So just within an hour, I'm going to pick her up for lunch. But it is
serendipity.
It is to some extent. But it's for so many years, women were exempt to some extent, I would say, from any clinical trials. It was taken for granted that men should be doing that, not realizing the differences between men and women and the gender component, obviously, which should be treated. I think this is definitely a huge potential within itself. We have one of our companies called FemiGuard, which is one of our 20 companies in Sanara Ventures, which is a femtech technologies. We've been looking into IVFs, into which Israel is an amazing place to invest in that, because we cherish and appreciate birth as a nation, and there's a lot of support which has been given by the government for IVF processes, and the data that was aggregated here, it's quite fascinating to dive into that. Obviously, as a VC, we shall scrutinize each and every company, but just this last month, I think we just saw like 4 or 5 companies in that area alone. So it is good. I think it eventually will balance itself, and we shall see it as part of the deal flow, regardless whether it's femtech or not.
Thanks for that. Assaf, we have so many more topics to cover, but I think we're going to hit pause in order to leave something for the next episode. So first of all, for me personally, it was really beautiful to see how everything connects. And, we started to speak at the beginning, and then we said we'll dive into deeper things later on. But I really love to find more people that have the same, point of view of life, the same that I do, in the manner of, having a holistic point of view and seeing things not just from one direction, but how the psychology impacts it, and how investments are being done towards it, and how we as founders or talents in the basketball or in any other position, how do we need to evolve during this journey? Life is a journey, without being too cliche or too spiritual, but it is a journey. And I think that after listening to you in the last hour, I can definitely see how all the dots are connected, from the 8 of 8 that you were a talent, but you didn't know yet that you're a talent. And nowadays, and how the performance that you began to learn back then, like 35 years ago, and how it serves you nowadays when you go to your keynote speaking events, and how all the behaviors and mechanisms that you had as a team player helps you to guide the founders that you nowadays are coaching. And also you began, you told me shortly in the beginning about this lowest of lows moment that you had back then in Kinarot, that you thought that everything is collapsing, that moment. And I thought about it, and I think this is one of the most beautiful things for founders and for people who see themselves with the entrepreneurial DNA, because this is it. I just had this morning, I came here and I was a little bit stressed because things happen in the morning, and you felt it in the beginning. And it's like, this is part of the drill, and this is this roller coaster that once in few months, in few years, it depends where it catches you. You have this point in time that you look at the sky and you see how everything are going to happen. How did this puzzle is going to work, and you don't know. But you need to trust yourself, even in those moments that you feel pretty low, that things will be okay, that you will step out of this situation, that it's only for now, it's not forever, it's just temporary, and it will change. And then later on, you come out of it and you look back and you reflect, you say, wow, you can already identify that that's what happened. And after it happens to you several times, and as you grow up and become more, holistic and round in the way you see things, then you already know to identify on the chart, life chart, oh, here I had this point and here I had this point. But overall, like the charts of the founders, it rises, right? It rises to the right. So I had this lowest point and I had another lowest point, but it goes up. Definitely. And we learn how to see life in this way.
If I just may try to summarize what you just said, and from my perspective, as entrepreneurs, us as investors, basically we would like to see, talking about the team, technology, market, designated market, whatever, which is all true. I'm not trying to emphasize that. I'm trying to find the way to best illustrate, how the team it is eventually about the people, but to give it a bit more substance, you have to surround yourself with, the best colleagues, with the best researcher, with the best IP and legal support that you can. You have to surround yourself with the best investors that you can, that suits you, that suits this specific chemistry within that dynamic team or not. But more importantly, you have to surround yourself with yourself.
Exactly. I really liked this, the way you said it, because I believe, and that's exactly also how I write in the book that I'm working on now, everything begins and ends with you. And once you know yourself in a better way, once you have your deeper understanding of who you are, where you want to go, what are your strengths, your values, and what motivates you or what stops you.
And how you react to some feedbacks.
How you react to your behaviors. Then you can learn how to work with them to accommodate what you need. And this is the source of growth. And I think that this is the most important, acts in the startup journey, the way that you develop within this, because only then you can develop also the people around you and this machine that calls a startup. So I really like that you possess the same opinion.
Thank you much for the time, the attention, and the ability to share that beautiful morning together.
Great. So thank you for coming, Assaf. For people who want to get in touch with you, with Sanara, when can they find you?
Just on Sanara website, we have all our emails, and just look into Sanara Capital, Sanara Ventures. It's all together.
Wonderful. To our lovely listeners, we're going to hit pause until the next episode. That's also something I say to the entrepreneurs in my clinic in between sessions. If you enjoyed listening, I would really appreciate it if you share the podcast with people who you think would derive value from it. Thanks to the amazing studios at Google Campus that allow me to record all this content here. Feel free to visit my website at galiblochliran.com and leave your details there if you wish to be updated and learn more about the mental aspects of the entrepreneurial journey. Also, be sure to follow my podcast, The Human Founder, in any of your podcast apps, and please rate it so it will rise to the top. Let's hit pause. Till next time. Thanks, Assaf. It was a pleasure.
Same here. Pleasure.